Book 6. And thus Glaucon, after the argument has gone a weary way, the true and the false philosophers have at length appeared in view. I do not think, he said, that the way could have been shortened. I suppose not, I said, and yet I believe that we might have had a better view of both of them if the discussion could have been confined to this one subject, and if there were not many other questions awaiting us, which he who desires to see in what respect the life of the just differs from that of the unjust must consider. And what is the next question? He asked. Surely, I said, the one which follows next in order, inasmuch as philosophers only are able to grasp the eternal and unchangeable, and those who wander in the region of the many and variable are not philosophers. I must ask you, which of the two classes should be the rulers of our state, and how ca- and how can we rightly answer the question? Whichever of the two are best able to guard the laws and institutions of our state, let them be our guardians. Very good. Neither, I said, can there be any question that the guardian who is to keep anything should have eyes rather than no eyes. There can be no question of that. And are not those who are verily and indeed wanting in the knowledge of the true being and each being, and who have in their souls no clear pattern, and are unable, as with a painter's eye, to look at the absolute truth, and to that original to repair, and having perfect vision of the order, would order to the other world, to order the laws of both beauty, goodness, justice, in this, if not already ordered, to guard and preserve the order of them. Are not such persons, I ask, simply blind? Truly, he replied, they are much in that condition, and shall they be our guardians, which there are other too, besides being their equals in experience and falling short of them in no particular of virtue, also know the very truth of each being. There can be no reason, he said, for rejecting those who have this greatest of all great qualities. They must always have the first place unless they fail in some other respect. Suppose then, I said, that we determine how far they can unite this and their other excellencies. By all means, in the first place, as we began by observing, the nature of the philosopher has to be ascertained. We must come to an understanding about him, and when we have done so, then, if I am not mistaken, we shall also acknowledge that such an union of qualities is possible, and that those in whom they are united, and those only should be rulers in the state. What do you mean? Let us suppose that philosophical minds always loves, always love knowledge of a sort which shows them the eternal nature, not varying from generation and corruption. Agreed. And further, I said, let us agree that they are lovers of all true being. There is no part, whether greater or less, or more less or less or more or less honorable, which they are willing to renounce, as we said before, of the lover and the man of ambition. 2. And if they are to be what we were describing, is there not another quality which they should also possess? What quality? Truthfulness. They will never intentionally receive into their mind falsehood, which is their destination, and they will love the truth. Yes, that may be safely affirmed of them. Maybe, my friend, I replied, is not the word say rather, must be affirmed. For he whose nature is amorous of nothing cannot help loving all that belongs or is akin to the object of his affections. Right, he said, and is there anything more akin to wisdom than truth? How can there be? Can the same nature be a lover of wisdom and a lover of falsehood? Never. The true lover of learning then must from his earliest youth, as well as in him lies desire or truth, assuredly. But then again, as we know by experience, he whose desires are strong in one direction will have them weaker in others. They will be like a stream which has been drawn off into all other channels. True, he whose desires are drawn towards knowledge in every form will be absorbed in the pleasures of the soul and will hardly feel bodily pleasure. I mean, if he be a true philosopher and not a sham one, that is more certain. Such an one is sure to be temperate, and the reverse of covetous, for the motives which make another man of desirous of having and spending have no place in his character. Very true. Another criterion of the philosophical nature has also to be considered. What is that? There should be no secret corner of illiberality. Nothing can be more antagonistic than meanness to a soul which is ever longing after the whole of things, both divine and human. Most true, he replied. Then how can he, who has magnificence of mind, and is the spectator of all time and all existence, think much of human life? He cannot. How can such an one account that fearful? No, indeed. Then the cowardly and mean nature has no part in true philosophically. Certainly not. Or again, can he, who is harmoniously constituted, who is not covetous, or mean, or a boaster, or a coward, can he, I say, either be unjust or hard in his dealings? Impossible. Then you will soon observe whether a man is just and gentle, or rude or unsociable. These are the signs of this which distinguish even in youth the philosophical nature from the unphilosophical. True, there is another point which should be remarked. What point? Whether he has or has not pleasure in learning, for no one will love that which gives him pain, and in which after much toil he makes little progress. Certainly not. And again, if he is forgetful and retains nothing of what he learns, will he not be an empty vessel? That is certain. Laboring in vain, he must end in hating himself and his fruitless occupation. Yes. Then a soul which forgets cannot be ranked among genuine philosophic natures. We must insist that the philosopher should have a good memory, certainly, and once more, the inharmonious and unseemly nature can only tend to this proposition, undoubtedly. And do you consider truth to be akin to proposition or to this proposition to proposition? Then, besides other qualities, we must try to find a naturally well proportioned and gracious mind, which will move spontaneously towards the true being of everything. Certainly. Well, and do not all these qualities which we have been enumerating go together, and are they not, in a manner, necessary to a soul which is to have a full and perfect participation of being? They are absolutely necessary, he replied, and must not that be a blameless study, which he only can pursue who has the gift of a good memory and is quick to learn, noble, gracious, the friend of truth, justice, courage, temperance, who are his kindred. The god of jealousy himself, he said, could find no fault with such a study, and to men like him, I said, when perfected by years and education, and to this only you will entrust the state. Here Animantus interposed and said to the statements, Socrates, No one can over a reply, but when you talk in this way, a strange feeling passes over the minds of your hearers. They fancy then they fancy that they are led astray a little at each step in a when, owing to their own want of skill in asking and answering questions. These letters accumulate, and at the end of the discussion they are found to have sustained a mighty overthrow, and all the former notions appear to be turned upside down, and as unskilful players and dots are at last shut up by the more skilful adversaries, and have no peace to move, so they too find themselves shut up at last, for they have nothing to say in this new game, of which words are the context, and yet all the time they are in the right. The observation is suggested to me by what is now occurring, for any one of us might say that although in words he is not able to meet you at each step of the argument, he sees as a fact that the votaries of philosophy, where they carry on the study not only in youth as a part of education, but as the pursuit of the maturer years, most of them most of them become strange monsters, thought to stay heterogeneous, and that those who may be considered the best of them are made useless to the world by the very study which you extol. Well, and do you think that those who say so are wrong? I cannot tell, he replied, but I should like to know what is your opinion. Hear my answer. I am of opinion that they are quite right. Then how can you be justified in saying that cities will not cease from evil until philosophers rule in them, when philosophers are acknowledged by us to be of no use of them? You ask a question, I said, to which I replied can only be a parable. Yes, Socrates, and that is a way of speaking to which you are not at all accustomed, I suppose. I perceive, I said, that you are vastly amused at having plugged me into such a hopeless discussion, but now hear the parable, and then you will be still more amused in the meagreness of my imagination. For the manner in which the best men are treated in their own states is so grievous that no single thing on earth is comparable to it, and therefore I am to plead their cause. I must have recourse to fiction, and put together figures made up of many things, like the fabulous unions of gods and stars, which are found in pictures. Imagine then a fleet of a ship in which there's a captain who is taller and smaller than any of the crew, but he is a little deaf and has a similar infirmity in sight, and his knowledge of navigation is not much better. The sailors are quarreling with one another about the steering. Everyone is of opinion that he has a right to steer, though he has never learned the art of navigation, and cannot tell who taught him or when he learned, and will further assert that it cannot be taught, and they are ready to cut in pieces anyone who says the contrary. They throng about the captain, begging and praying him to commit the harm to them, and if at any time they do not prevail, but orders are preferred to them, they kill the orders or throw them overboard, and having first chained up the noble captain's senses with drink and some narcotic drug, they mutiny and take possession of the ship, and make free with the stores. Thus, eating and drinking, they proceed on their voyage in such manner as might be expected of them. Him who is the partisan and cleverly aids them in the plot of getting the ship out of captain's hand into their own, whether by force or persuasion. they compliment with the name of sailor, pilot, able seaman, and abuse this other sort of man, whom they call a good for nothing, but that the true pilot must pay attention to the year and seasons and sky and stars and winds and whatever else belongs to his art, if he intends to be really qualified for the command of a ship, and that he must and will be the steerer, whether other people like or not. The possibility of this union of authority with steerers art has never seriously entered into their thoughts or been made part of their calling. Now in vessels which are instead of utility, and by sailors who are mutineers, how will the true pilot be regarded? Will he not be called by them a prater, a stargazer, a good for nothing? Of course, said Adimantus. Then, then you will hardly need it, I said, to hear the interpretation of the figure, which describes the true philosopher of in his relation to the state, for you misunderstand already, certainly. Then suppose you suppose you now take this parable to the gentle with surprise at finding that philosophers has no honor in the cities. Explain it to him and try to convince him that their having honor will be far more extraordinary. I will say to him that in deeming the best votaries of philosophy to be useless to the rest of the world, he is right, but also tell him to attribute their uselessness to the fault of those who will not use them and not to themselves. The pilot should not humbly beg the sailors to be commended by him. That is not the order of nature, neither are the wise to go to the dogs of the rich. In the ingenious author of this saying told a lie, but the truth is that when a man is ill, when he be rich or poor, to the physician he must go, and he who wants to be governed, to him who is able to govern. The ruler who is good for anything ought not to beg his subjects to be good by him, although the present governors of mankind are of a different time. They may be justly compared to the mutinous sailors and the true helmsmen, to those who are called by them good for nothings and stargazers. Precisely so, he said, for these reasons, and among men like this, philosophy, the noblest pursuit of all, is not likely to be much esteemed by those of the opposite affection. Not that the greatest and most lasting injury is done to her by her opponents, but by her own professing followers, the same of whom you suppose the accuser to say that the greater number of them are arrogant gods and the best are useless, in which opinion I agreed. Yes, and the reason why the good are useless has now been explained. True. Then shall we proceed to show that the corruption of the majority is also unavoidable, and that this is not to be laid to the charge of philosophy any more than the other? By all means. And let us ask and answer in turn, first going back to the description of the gentle and noble nature. Truth, as you will remember, was his leader, whom he followed always, in all things. Failing in this, he was an impostor and had no part or lot in true philosophy. Yes, that was said. Well, and is not this one quality, to mention the others, greatly at variance with Christian notions of him? Certainly he said. And have we not a right to say in his defense that the true lover of knowledge is always striving after being, that is this nature? He will not rest in the multiplicity of individuals, which is an appearance only, but will go on. The keen edge will not be blunted, nor the force of his desire abate until he have attained to the knowledge of the true nature of every sense. by sympathetic and kindred power in the soul, and by that power drawing their mingling and becoming incorporate with very being, having begotten mind and truth, he will have knowledge and will live and go truly, and then, and not till then, will he cease from his travel. Nothing, he said, can be more just than such a description of him. And will the love of a lie be any part of his philosopher's nature? Will he not utterly hate lie? He will. And when truth is the captain, we cannot suspect any evil of the band which he leads. Impossible. Justice and health of mind will be the company, and temperance will follow after. True, he replied. Neither is there any reason which I should again set in array the philosopher's virtues, as you will doubtless remember the courage, magnificence, apprehension, memory were his natural gifts, and you objected that, although no one could deny when then I said, still, if you leave words and look at facts, the persons who are thus described as someone of them manifestly useless, and the greater number utterly depraved. We were then led to inquire in the grounds of these accusations, and have now arrived at the point of asking why are the majority bad, which question of necessity brought us back to the examination definition of the true philosopher. Exactly. And we have next to consider the corruptions of the philosophic nature. Why so many are spoiled and so few escape spoiling? I am speaking of those who were said to be useless but not weak, and when we have done with them, we'll speak the imitators of philosophy. What manner of men are they who aspire after a profession which is above them, and of which they are unworthy, and then by their manifold inconsistencies bring upon philosophy and upon all philosophers the universal reprobation of which we speak? And what these corruptions, he said, I will see if I can explain them to you. Everyone will admit that another having in perfection all the qualities which we kind a philosopher is rare blood, which is seldom seen among men. Rare indeed, and what numberless and powerful causes tend to destroy these rare natures. What causes? In the first place, there are their own virtues, their courage, temperance, and the rest of them, every one of which praiseworthy qualities, and this is a most singular circumstance, destroys and distracts from philosophy the soul, which is the popular, which the possessor of them. That is very singular, he replied. Then there are then there are all the ordinary goals of life and beauty, wealth, strength, rank, and great connections in the state. You understand the sort of things these also have a corrupting and destructive effect. I don't understand, but I should like to know more precisely what you mean about them. Grasp the truth as a whole, I said, and in the right way, you will then have no difficulty in apprehending the preceding remarks, and they will no longer appear strange to you. And I to how am I to do so? He asked. When I said we know that all germs or seeds, whether vegetable or animal, when they fail to meet with proper nutriment or climate or soil in proportion to their vigor, are all the more sensitive to the want of a suitable environment, for evil is a greater enemy to what is good than to what is not. Very true. There is a reason in supposing that the first natures, when under alien conditions, receive more injury than the inferior, because the contrast is greater, certainly. And may we not say Ademantus that the most gifted minds, when they are ill-educated, become preeminently bad? Do not great crimes and the spirit of pure evil spring out of the fullness of nature, reign by education rather than form and inferiority, whereas weak natures are scarcely capable of any good, of any very good good, or a very good evil? There I think that you are right, and your philosophers and our philosopher follows the same analogy. He is like a plant which, having proper nurture, most necessary most necessarily grow and mature into all virtue, but if sown and planted in an alien soil, becomes the most noxious of all weeds, unless he be preserved by some divine power. Do you really think, as people so often say, that our youth are corrupted by service, or that private teachers of the art corrupt them in any degree worth speaking of? Are not the public who say these things the greatest of all sophists? And do they not educate the perfection young and old, men and women alike, education them after their own hearts? When is this accomplished? He said, when they meet together and the whole sits down at an assembly or in a court of law or a theater or camp or in any other popular resort, and there's a great uproar, and they praise some things which are being said or done, and blame other things, equal exaggerating both, shouting and clapping their hands, and the echo of the rocks, and the place in which the assembled redoubles the sound of the praise of flame. At such a time will not be a young man's heart, as they say, live within him. Will any private training enable him to stand firm against the overwhelming flood of popular opinion, or will he be carried away by the stream? Will he not have the notion of good and evil which the public in general have? He will do as they do, and as they are, such will he be. Says Socrates, necessity will compel him. And yet I said, there is still good in necessity which has not been mentioned. What is that? The gentle force of a tender or confiscation of that which, as you are aware, these new sophists and educators who are the public apply when their words are powerless. Indeed they do, and in right good earnest. Now what opinion of any other sophist or of any private person can be expected to overcome in such an equal contest? None, he replied. No, indeed, I see. Even to make the attempt is a great piece of folly. There neither is, nor has been, nor is ever likely to be any different type of character which has had not the training in virtue but that which is supplied by public opinion. I speak, my friend, of human virtue only. What is more than human, the proverb says, is not included. For I would not have you ignorant that, in the present evil state of governments, whatever is safe and comes to good is safe by the power of God, as we may truly say. I quite assent, he replied. Then let me grab what your assent also to a further observation. What are you going to say? Why, that all those mercenary individuals, whom the many call sophists, and whom they deem to be their adversaries, do in fact teach nothing but the opinion of the many, that is to say, the opinion of the assemblies, and this is their wisdom. I might compare them to a man who should study the tempers and desires of a mighty strong beast, which fed by him he would learn how to approach and handle him, also at what times and from what causes he is dangerous of the rivers, and what is the meaning of his several cries, and by what sound, and by what sounds when another utters them. He suited and infuriated, and you may suppose further that when, by continually attending upon him, he has become perfect in all this, he calls his knowledge wisdom, and makes of it a system of art which he proceeds to teach, although he has no real notion of what he means by the principles of patience of which he is speaking, but calls this honorable and that is honorable, or good or evil, or just or unjust, all in accordance with the taste and tempers of the great brute. Good he pronounces to be that in which the best delights, and evil to be that which he dislikes, and he can give and he can give no other account of them except that the just and noble are the necessary, having never himself seen, and having no power as explaining to others but the nature of either, or the difference between them, which immense by heaven, would not such an one be a rare educator? Indeed he would. And in what way does he thinks that wisdom is the discernment of the tempers and tastes of the motley multitude, whether in painting or music, or finally in politics, differ from him whom I have been describing. For when a man consorts with the many and exhibits to them his post and other works or other work of art of the service which he has done the state, making them his judges, when he is not obliged the so-called necessity of the omit, you oblige him to produce whatever he pays, and yet their reasons are utterly ludicrous, which they give in confirmation of their own notions about the honorable and good. Did you ever hear any of them which were not? No, nor am I likely to hear. You recognize the truth of what I have been saying? Then let me ask you to consider further whether the world will ever be induced to believe in the existence of absolute beauty rather than of the many beautiful, or of the absolute in each kind rather than of the many in each kind. Certainly not. Then the world cannot possibly be a philosopher. Impossible. And therefore philosophers must inevitably fall under the censure of the world. They must, and of individuals who consort with the mob and seek to please them. That is evident. Then do you see any way in which the philosopher can be served in his calling to the end? And remember what we were saying of him, that he was to have quickness and memory and courage and magnificence. These were admitted by us to be the true philosopher's gifts. Yes, will not such a one from his early childhood be in all things first among all, especially in his bodily endowments, like his mental ones? Certainly, he said, and his friends and fellow citizens will want to use him as he gets older for their own purposes. No question, falling at his feet, they will make requests to him, and him honor and flatter him, because they want to get into their hands now the power which he will one day possess. That often happens, he said. And what will a man such as he is be likely to do under such circumstances, especially if he be a citizen of a great city, rich and noble and a tall, proper youth? Will he not be full of boundless aspirations, and fancy himself able to manage the affairs of Hellenes or barbarians? Having got such notions into his head, will he not delight and elevate himself in the fullness of vain pomp and senseless pride? To be sure he will. Now he is in this state of mind. If someone gently comes to him and tells him that he is a fool and must get understanding, which can only be got by slaving for it, do you think that under such adverse circumstances he will be easily induced to listen? Far otherwise, and even if there be someone who through inherent goodness or natural reasonableness has had his eyes opened a little and is humbled and taken captive by philosophy, how will his friends behave when he thinks that they are likely to lose the advantage which they're hoping to reap from his companionship? Will they not will they not do, and they say nothing to prevent him from yielding to his better nature and to render his teacher powerless, using to this and private intrigues as well as public prosecutions? There can be no doubt of it. And how can one who is thus circumstanced ever become a philosopher? Impossible. Then were we not right in saying that even the very qualities which make a man a philosopher may, it he if he be ill-educated, divert him from philosophy, knowledge, knowledge than riches and their accompaniments, and, and the other so-called goods of life. We were quite right. Thus, my excellent friend, is work about all that green and value which I have been describing of the NATO species best adapted to the best of to the best of to the best of all pursuits. They are natus which we maintain to be rare at any time, this being the class out of which come the men who were the authors of the great evil to states and individuals, and also of the greatest good when the tide carries them in the direction, but the small man never was the door of any great thing, either to individuals or to states. That is most true, he said, and so philosophy is left desolate, with her marriage right incomplete, for her own have fallen away and forsake her, and while they are leading a false and unbecoming life, other unworthy persons, seeing that she has no kinsman to be her protectors, enter in and dishonor her, and fasten upon her the reproaches which, as you say, her reproofs utter, who affirm of her votaries that some are good for nothing, and that regret the number deserve the severest punishment. That is certainly what people say. Yes, and what else would you expect? I said, when you think of the puny creatures who, seeing this land open to them, land well stocked with fair names and showy titles, like prisoners running out of prison into a sanctuary, take a clip out of their threads into philosophy, those who do be, those who do so being probably the cleverest hands at their at their own miserable crafts, for although philosophy be in this every case, still there remains in a dignity about her which is not to be found in the arts, and many are thus attracted by her, whose natures are imperfect and whose souls are maimed and disfigured by their meannesses, as their bodies are by their threats and cuffs. Is not this avoidable? Yes. Are there not exactly like a bald little tinker who has just got out of durance and come into a fortune? He takes a bath and puts on the new coat and is decked out as bridegroom going to marry his master's daughter, who is left broke and desolate. A most exact parallel. What will be the issue of such marriages? Will they not be vile and bastard? There can be no question of it. And when persons who are unworthy of education approach philosophy and make an alliance with her who is in a rank above them, what sort of ideas and opinion and opinions are likely to be generated? Will they not be sophisms, captivating to the ear, having nothing in them genuine, or worthy of akin to true wisdom? No doubt, he said. Then Adeimantus, I said, the worthy disciples of philosophy will be but a small remnant, perchance some noble and well-educated person detained by exile in her service, who, in the absence of corrupting influences, remains devoted to her, or some lofty soul born in a mean city, the politics of which he contends and neglects, and there may be a gifted few who leave the arts which they justly despise and come to her, or peradventure there are some who are destined by our friend Theages Riddle. For everything in the life of Theages conspired to divert him from philosophy, but ill health kept him away from politics. My own case of the internal side is hardly worth mentioning, for rarely if ever has such a monitor been given to any other man. Those who belong to this small class have tested how sweet and blessed a possession philosophy is, and have also seen enough of the madness of the multitude, and they know that no politician is honest, nor is there any champion of justice at whose side they may fight and be safe. Such an one may be compared to a man who has fallen among wild beasts. He will join in the weakness of his fellows, but neither is he able singly to resist all the fixed natures, and therefore seeing that he would be not who he would be of no use to the state of his to or to his friends, and reflecting that he would have to throw away his life without doing any good either to himself or others, he holds his peace and goes his own way. He is likely he is like one who in the storm of dust and sleet which the driving wind hurries along, retires under the shelter of a wall, and seeing the rest of mankind full of weakness, he is content. If, if only if only he can live his own life and be pure for every of unrighteousness, and depart in peace and goodwill with bright hopes. Yes, he said, and he will have done the great work before he departs. A great work, yes, but not the greatest unless he find a state suitable to him. For in the state which is suitable to him, he will have larger God and be the savior of his country as well as of himself. The causes of why philosophy is in such an evil name have now been sufficiently explained. The injustice of the charges against her has been shown. Is there anything more which we should say? Nothing more on that object, he replied, but should like to know which of the governments now existing is in your opinion that the one adapted to her. Not any of them, I said, and that is precisely the accusation which I bring against them. Not one of them is worthy of the philosophic nature, and hence that nature is warped and strange, as the exotic seed, which is sown and is in foreign land, becomes the naturalist, and is wont to be overpowered and to lose itself in the new soil. Even so, this god of philosophy, instead of persisting, degenerates and receives another character. But if philosophy ever finds in the state that perfection which she herself is, then will be seen that she is in truth divine, and that all other things, whether natures of men or institutions, are but men. And now I know that you are going to ask what that state is. Now he said, there you are wrong, for I was going to ask another question whether it is the state of which we are the founders and inventors of some other. Yes, I replied, ours in most respects, but you may remember my saying before that some living authority will always be required in the state, having the same idea of the constitution which guided you when as legislator you were laying down as the laws. That was said, he replied, yet, but in a satisfactory manner, you frightened us by deposing objections, which certainly showed that the discussion would be long and difficult, and what still remains is the reverse of easy. What is the remaining? The question how the study of philosophy may be so ordered as not to be the ruin of the state. All great attempts are attended with risk. Hard is the good, as men say. Still, he said, let the point be cleared up, and the query will then be complete. I shall not be hindered. I said, but any want of will, but if at all by a want of power, my seal you may see for yourselves, and please to remark in what I am about to say, how boldly and hesitatingly I declare that states should pursue philosophy, not as they do now, but in a different spirit. In what manner? At present, I said, The students of philosophy are quite young, beginning when they are hardly past childhood. They devote only the time saved for money making and housekeeping to such pursuits, and even those of them who are reputed to have most of the philosophic spirit, when they come within sight of the great difficulty of the subject, I mean dialectic, take themselves off in afterlife. In afterlife, when invited by someone else, they may they may perhaps go and hear a lecture, and about this they make much ado, for philosophy is not considered by them to be their proper business. At least, when they go out, in most cases they are extinguished more truly than Heraclitus' son, inasmuch as they never light up again. Heraclitus said that the sun was extinguished every evening and relighted every morning, but what ought to be the cause? Just the opposite. In childhood and youth they study, and what philosophy they learn should be suited to their tender years during this period while they are growing up toward manhood. The chief and special care should be given to their bodies, that they may have them to use in the service of philosophy. As life advances and the intellect begins to mature, let them increase the gymnastics of the soul. But when the strength of our citizens fails in its past civil and military duties, then let them range at will and engage in no serious labor, as we intend them to live happily here, and to count this life with a similar happiness in another. How truly in earnest you are, Socrates, he said. I am sure of that, and yet most of your hearers, if I am not mistaken, are likely to be still more earnest in their opposition to you, and will never be convinced, Thrasymachus least of all. Do not make a careless state, because Thrasymachus and me, who have recently become friends, although indeed we were never enemies, for I shall go on striving to the utmost until I either confront him and other men, or do something which may profit them against the day when they live again, and hold the like discourse in another state of existence. You are speaking of a time which is not very near. Rather, I replied, of a time which is as nothing in comparison with eternity. Nevertheless, I do not wonder that the many refuse to believe, for they have never seen that of which we are now speaking really. They have seen only a conventional imitation of philosophy, consisting of words artificially brought together, not like this of ours having a natural unity, but a human being who in word and walk is perfectly molded, as far as he can be, into proportion and likeness of virtue, such a man ruling in a city which bears the same image. They have never said sin, neither one nor many of them. Do you think that they ever did? No, indeed. No, my friend, and they have seldom, if ever, had three and noble sentiments, such as men uttered when they are honesty and by every means in their power, seeking after truth for the sake of knowledge, while they look coldly on the subtleties of controversy, of which the end is opinion and strife, whether they meet with them in the courts of law or in society. They are strangers, he said, to the words of which you speak. And this was what we foresaw, and this was the reason why it would force us to admit, not without fear and hesitation, that neither cities nor states nor individuals will ever attain perfection until the small class of philosophers whom whom we term useless but not corrupt as are providentially compelled, whether they will or not, to take care of the state, and until like necessity to be laid on the state to obey them, or until kings, or if not kings, the sons of kings, prince or princes, are divinely inspired with the true love of true philosophy, that either or both of these alternatives are impossible, I see no reason to affirm. If they were so, We might indeed be justly ridiculed as dreamers and visionaries. Am I not right? Quite right. If then, in the countless ages of the past, or at the present hour, in some foreign clime, which is far away and beyond our ken, the perfected philosopher is or has been or hereafter shall be compelled by a superior power to have the charge of the state. We are ready to set to the dead that this our constitution has been and is yet and will be whenever the muse of philosophy is queen. There is no impossibility in all this, that there is a difficulty we acknowledge ourselves. My opinion agrees with yours, he said. But do you mean to say that this is not the opinion of the multitude? I should imagine, he replied. Oh, my friend, I said, do not attack the multitude. They will charge their minds, if not in an aggressive spirit, but gently, and with the view of soothing them and removing the dislike of over education. You show them your philosophers as they really are, and describe as you were just now doing their character and profession, and then mankind will see that he of whom you are speaking is not such as they suppose. If they view him in this new light, they will surely charge with no notion of him, and answer in another strain. Who can be at enmity with one who loves them, who that is himself gentle and free from envy will be jealous of one in whom there is no jealousy? Nay, let me answer for you that in a few this harsh temper may be found, but not the majority of mankind. I quite agree with you, he said. And do you not also think, as I do, that the harsh feeling which the many entertain towards philosophy originates in the pretenders who rush in uninvited and are always abusing them and finding fault with them, who make persons instead of things the theme of their conversation, and nothing can be more unbecoming in philosophers than this. It is more unbecoming. For he, Adeimantus, whose mind is fixed upon true being, has surely no time to look down upon the facts of the earth, or to be filled with malice or envy, contending against man. His eye is ever directed towards things fixed and immutable, which he sees neither injuring nor injured by one another, but all in order moving according to reason. This he imitates, and to this he will, as far as he can, conform himself. Can a man help imitating that which he holds referential converse? Impossible. And the philosopher holding converse with the divine order becomes orderly and divine as far as the nature of man allows, but like everyone else, he will suffer from detraction, of course, and if a necessity be laid upon him of fashioning not only himself but human nature generally, whether instances or individuals, into that which he holds elsewhere, will he think you be an unskillful artificer of justice, temperance, and every civil virtue, anything but unskillful? And if the world perceives that we are saying about him is the truth, will they be angry with philosophy? Will they disbelieve us when we tell them that not the notes that can be happy which is not designed by artists who imitate the heavenly pattern? They will not be angry if they understand, he said, but how will they draw out the plan of which you are speaking? They will begin by talking the state and the manners of men, from which, as from a tablet, they will rub out the picture and leave a clean surface. This is no easy task, but whenever easy or not, herein will lie the difference between them and every other legislator. They will have nothing to do either with individual states, and will inscribe no laws, until they have either one or themselves made a clean service. They will be very right, he said. Having effected this, they will proceed to trace an outline of the constitution, no doubt, and when they are feeling in the work as I conceived, they will often turn their eyes outwards and downwards. I mean that they will first look at absolute justice and beauty and temperance, and again at the human copy, and will mingle and temper the various elements of life into the image of man, and this they will conceive according to that other image which, when existing among men, Homer calls the form and likeness of God. Very true, he said, and one feature they will erase, and another they will put in until they have made the ways of men as far as possible agreeable to the ways of God. Indeed, he said, in no way could they make a fairer picture. And now I said, are we beginning to persuade those whom you describe as rushing at us with might and main, that the painter of constitutions is such an one as we are praising, at whom they were so very indignant, because to his hands we committed the state, and are they going a little calmer at what they have just heard, much calmer if there is any sense in them. Why, where can they still find any ground for objection? Will they doubt that the philosopher is a lover of truth and being? They would not be so unreasonable, or that his nature, being such as we have delineated, is akin to the highest good. Neither can they doubt this. But again, will they tell us that such a nature, placed under favorable circumstances, will not be perfectly good and wise if any ever was? Or will they prefer those whom we have rejected? Surely not. Then will they still be angry at our saying that until philosophers bear rule, state and individuals will have no rest for evil, nor will this our imaginary state ever be realized? I think that they will be less angry. Still, we assume that they are not only less angry but quite gentle, and that they have been converted for and for very shame, if for no other reason, cannot refuse to come to terms. By all means, he said. Then let us suppose that the reconciliation has been effected. Will anyone deny the other point, that they that there may be sons of kings or princes who are by nature philosophers? Certainly not, he said. And when they have come into being, will anyone say that they must of necessity be destroyed? That they can hardly be saved is not denied even by us, but that in the whole course of age no single one of them can escape. Who will venture to affirm this? Who indeed? But, said I, one is enough. Let there be one man who has a city obedient to his will, and he might bring into existence the ideal polity about which the world is so incredulous. Yes, one is enough. The ruler may impose the laws and institutions which we have been describing, and the citizens may possibly be willing to obey them. Certainly, and that others should approve of what we approve is no miracle or impossibility. I think not, but we have sufficiently shown in what has preceded that all this, if only possible, is absolutely for the best we have. And now we say not only that our laws, if they could be enacted, would be for the best, but also that the enactment of them, though this difficult, is not impossible. Very good. and so with pain and toil we have reached the end of one subject, but more remains to be discussed. How and by what studies and pursuits will the saviors of constitution be created, and at what ages are they to apply themselves to their several studies? Certainly, I omitted the troublesome business of the position of men, of women, and the procreation of children, and the appointment of the rulers, because I knew that the perfect state would be eyed with jealousy, and was difficult of attainment. But that piece of cleverness was not of much service to me, for I had to discuss them all the same. The women and children are now disposed of, but the other question of the rulers must be investigated from the beginning. We were saying, as we will remember, that they were to be lords of the country, tried by the best of pleasures and pains, and neither in hardships, nor in dangers, nor at any other critical moment were to lose their patriotism. He was to be rejected who failed, but he who always came forth pure, like gold in the refiner's fire, was to be made a ruler and to receive honor and rewards in life and after death. This was the sort of thing which was being said, and then the argument turned aside and fell her face, not liking to stir the occasion which has now arisen. I perfectly remember, he said, "Yes, my friend, and I tend and yes, my friend," I said, and I then sank from hazarding the bold word. But now let me dare to say that a perfect guardian must be a philosopher. Yes, he said, let that be affirmed. And do not suppose that there will be many of them, for the gifts which were deemed by us to be essential rare go together. They are most found in shreds and patches. What do you mean? He said. You are aware, I replied, that quick intelligence, memory, sagacity, cleverness, and similar qualities do not often go together, and that persons who possess them and are at the same high spirited and magnanimous are not so constituted by nature as to live orderly and in a perfect, peaceful, and settled manner. They are driven anyway by their impulses, and all solid principle goes out of them. Very true, he said. On the other hand, those steadfast natures, which can better be depended upon, which in a battle are impenetrable to fear immovable, are equally immovable when there is anything to be learned. They are always in turbid state, and are apt to yawn and go to sleep over any intellectual toil. Quite true. And yet, we were saying that both qualities were necessary in those to whom the higher education is to be imparted, and who are to share in any office or command. Certainly, he said, and will they be a class which is rarely found? Yes, he said, yes, indeed. Then the aspirant must not only be tested in those labors and dangers and pleasures which we mentioned before, but there is another kind of probation which we did not mention. He must be exercised also in many kinds of knowledge, to see whether the soul will be able to endure the highest of all, or will faint under them, as in any other studies and exercises. Yes, he said, you are quite right in testing them. But what do you mean by the highest of knowledge? You may remember I said that we divided the soul into three parts and distinguished the several natures of justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom. Indeed, he said, if I forgotten, I should not deserve to hear more. And do you remember the word of question which preceded the discussion of them? To what do you refer? We were saying, if I am not mistaken, that he who wanted to see them in their perfect beauty, must take a longer and more circuitous way, at the end of which they would appear, but that we could add on a popular exposition of them on a level with the discussion which had preceded, and you replied that such an exposition would be enough for you. And so the inquiry was continued in what to me seemed to be a very inaccurate manner, whether you were satisfied or not. It is for you to say. Yes, he said. I I thought and the others thought that you gave us a very measure of truth. But my friend, I said, a measure of such things, which in any degree falls short of the whole truth, is not fair measure, for nothing imperfect is the measure of anything, although persons are too apt to be contented and think that they need such no further. Not an uncommon case when people are indolent. Yes, I said, and there cannot be any worse fault in a guardian of the state and of the laws. True, the guardian then, I said, must be required to take the longer circuit and toil at learning as well as at gymnastics, or he will never reach the highest knowledge of which, as we were just now saying, is proper calling. What, he said, is there a knowledge still higher than this, higher than justice and the other virtues? Yes, I said, there is. And of the knowledge, and of the virtues too, we must behold not the outland merely, as at present nothing short of the most finished picture, so satisfy us, when little things are elaborated with an infinity of pains, in order that they may appear in their full beauty and utmost clearness. How ridiculous that we should not think the highest truths worthy of attaining the highest accuracy, a right noble thought. But do you suppose that we shall refrain from asking you, what is the highest knowledge? Nay, I said, as he asks if you will, but I am certain that you have heard the answer many times, and now you either do not understand me, or, as I rather think, you are disposed to be troublesome, for you have often been told that the idea of good is the highest knowledge, and that all other things become useful and advantageous only by the use of this. You can hardly be ignorant of this I was about to speak, concerning which, as you have often heard me say, we know so little, and without which any other knowledge of possession of any kind will profit us nothing. Do you think that the possession of all other things is of any value if we do not possess the good, or of the knowledge of all other things if we have no knowledge of beauty and goodness? Absolutely not. You are further aware that most people affirm pleasure to be the good, but the farther sort of which say it is knowledge. Yes, and you are aware too. The latter cannot explain what they mean by knowledge, but are obliged after all to say knowledge of the good. How ridiculous! Yes, I said that they should begin by reproaching us with our ignorance of the good, and they presume our knowledge of it. For the good they divine to be knowledge of the good, as just as if we understood them when they use the term good. This is of course ridiculous. Most true, he said, and those who make pleasure the good are in equal perplexity, for they are compelled to admit that they are bad pleasures as well as good, certainly, and therefore to acknowledge that bad and good are the same. Two, there can be no doubt about the numerous difficulties in which this question is involved. There can be none. Further, do we not see that many are willing to do, or to have to seem to be, what is just and honorable without the reality, but know what is satisfied with the appearance of good? The reality is what they seek. In the case of the good, appearance is despised by everyone. Very true, he said, of this stand, which every sort of man pursues, and makes the end of all his actions, having at present even that there is such an end, and yet hesitating because neither because neither knowing the nature nor having the same assurance of this as of other things, and therefore losing whatever good there is in other things of a principle such and so great as these are the best men in our state, to whom everything is entrusted, to be in darkness of ignorance. Certainly not, he said. I am sure, I said, that he who does not know how the beautiful and the just are likewise good will be but a sorry guardian of them, and I suspect that no one who is ignorant of the good will have a true knowledge of them. That, he said, is a shrewd suspicion of yours, and if we only have a guardian who has this knowledge, our state will be perfectly ordered. Of course, he replied, but I wish that you would tell me whether you conceive the supreme principle of the good to be knowledge of pleasure or different from either. I, I said, I knew all along, the, all along that a fastidious gentleman like you would not be contented with the thoughts of other people about these matters. True, Socrates, but I must say that one like you has one like, but I must say that one who like you has passed a lifetime in the study of philosophy should be always repeating the opinions of others and never telling him his own. Well, but has anyone a right to say positively what he does not know? Now, he said with the assurance of positive certainty, he has no right to do that, but he may say what he thinks as a matter of opinion. And do you know not, I said, that all mere opinions are bad, and the best of them blind? You would not deny that those who have any true notion without intelligence are only like blind men who feel their way along the road. Very true. And do you wish to behold what is blind and crooked and base, when others will tell you of brightness and beauty? Still, I must implore you, Socrates said Glaucon, not to turn away just as you are reaching the goal. If you will only give such an explanation of the good as you have already given of justice and temperance and the other virtues, we shall be satisfied. Yes, my friend, and shall be at least equally satisfied, but I cannot help fearing that I shall fail, and that my indiscreet zeal will bring ridicule upon me. No, sweet sirs, let us not at present ask what is the actual nature of the good, for to reach what is now in my thoughts will be an effort too great for me, but of the child of the good who is like him. I would fain speak, if I could be sure that you wish to hear, otherwise not. By all means, he said, tell us about the child, and you shall remain in our grave for the account of the parent. Do indeed wish, I replied, that I could pay, and you receive the account of the parent, and not as now, of the offspring only. Take, however, this letter by way of interest, and at the same time have a care that I do not render a false account, although I have no intention of deceiving you. Yes, we will take all the care that we can proceed. Yes, I said, but I must first come to an understanding with you and remind you of what I have mentioned in the course of this discussion at, and at many other times. What? The old story that there is a many beautiful and a many good, and so of other things which we describe and divide. To all of them the term many is applied. True, he said, and there is an absolute beauty and absolute good, and of other things to which the term many is applied, there is an absolute, for they may be brought under a single idea which is called the sense of each. Very true. The many, as we say, are seen but not known, and the ideas are known but not seen. Exactly. And what is the organ with which we see the visible things? The sight, he said. And with the hearing, I said, we hear, and with the other senses perceive the other objects of sense. 2. But have you remarked that sight is by far the most costly and complex piece of workmanship which the artificial senses ever contrived? No, I never have, he said. Then reflect, has the ear of voice need of any third or additional nature in order that the one may be able to hear and the other to be heard? Nothing of the sort. Now indeed, I replied, and the same is true of the most, if not all, the other senses. You would not say that any of them requires such an addition. Certainly not. But you see that without the addition of some other nature, there is no seeing or being seen. How do you mean? Sight being as conceived in the eyes, and he who has eyes wanting to see, color being also present in them, still unless there be a third nature specially adapted to the purpose, the owner of the eyes will see nothing, and the colors will be invisible. Of what nature are you speaking? Of that which you term light, I replied. To he said, noble then is the bond which links together sight and visibly, and great beyond other bonds by no small difference of nature, for light is their bond, and light is no ignorable thing. Nay, he said, the reverse of ignoble. And which, I said, is the gods of the gods in heaven, would you say was the lord of this element? Whose is the like which makes the eye to see perfectly and the visible to appear? You mean the sun, as you and all mankind say. May not the relation of sight to this deity be described as follows? How? Neither sight nor the eye in which sight resides is the sun. No. Yes, of all the organs of sense, the eye is the most like the sun, by far the most like. The power which the eye possesses is a sort of effluence which dispenses from the sun. Exactly. Then the sun is not sight, but the author of sight who is recognized by sight through his seed. And this is he whom I call the child of the good, whom the good begat in his own likeness, to be in the invisible world in relation to sight and the things of sight, when the good is in the intellectual world in relation to mind and the things of mind. Will you be a little more explicit? He said. Why, I said that the eyes, when a person directs them towards objects on which the light of day is no longer shining, but the moon and stars only, see dimly and are nearly blind, they seem to have no clearness of vision in them. Very true. But when they are directed towards objects on which the sun shines, they see clearly and there is sight in them. Certainly. And the soul is like the eye. When resting upon that on which truth and being shine, the soul perceives and understands, and is radiant with intelligence. But when turned towards the twilight of becoming and perishing, then she has opinion only, and goes blinking out about, and is first of one opinion and then of another, and seems to have no intelligence. Just so. Now that which imparts truth to be known and the power of knowing to the knower is what I would have you term the idea of good, and this you will deem to be the cause of science, and of truth insofar as the latter becomes the subject of knowledge. Beautiful too as are both truth and knowledge, you will be right in esteeming this other nature as more beautiful than either, and as in the previous instance, light and sight may be truly said to be like the sun, and yet not to be the sun. So in this other sphere, science and truth may be deemed to be like the good, not the good. The good has a place of honor yet higher. Wow, what a wonder of beauty that must be, she said, which is the author of science and truth, and yet surpasses them in beauty, for you surely cannot mean to say that pleasure is the good. God forbid, I replied, but may I ask you to consider the image in another point of view? In what point of view? You will say, would you not, that the sun is not only the author of visibly in all visible things, but of generation and nourishment and growth, though he himself is not generation. Certainly, in like manner, the good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge to all things known, but of their being and essence, and yet the good is not the sense, but far exceeds essence in dignity and power. Glaucon said with a ludicrous earnestness, but the light of heaven, how amazing! Yes, I said, and the exaggeration may be set down to you, for you made me utter my fancies, and pray continue to utter them at any rate. Let us hear if there is anything more to be said about the similitude of the sun. Yes, I said, there's a great deal more. Then omit nothing, however slight. I will do my best, I said, but I should think that a great deal will have to be omitted. I hope not, he said. You have to imagine then that there are two ruling powers, and that one of them is set over the intellectual world, the other over the visible. I do not say heaven, lest you should fancy that I am playing upon the name or Hanos or Hatos. I suppose that you have the distinction of the visible and intelligible fixed in your mind. I have. Now take a line which has been cut into two equal parts, and divide each of them again in the same proportion, and suppose the two main divisions to answer, one to the visible and the other to the intelligible, and then compare the subdivisions in respect of the clearness and one of clearness, and you will find that the first section is the sphere of the visible consists of images, and by images I mean in the first place shadows, and in the second place reflections in water and in solid, smooth and polished bodies and alike. Do you understand? Yes, understand. Imagine now the other section, of which this is only a resemblance, to include the animals which we see and everything that grows or is made. Very good. Will you not admit that will you admit that both the sections of this division have different degrees of truth, and that the copy is to the original as the sphere of opinion is to the sphere of knowledge? Most undoubtedly. Next, proceed to consider the manner in which the sphere of the intellectual is to be divided. In what manner? Thus, there are two subdivisions. In the lower, of which the soul uses the figure given by the former division as images, the inquiry can only be hypothetical, and instead of going upwards to a principle descends to the other hand. In the higher of the two, the soul passes out of hypothesis and goes up to a principle which is above hypothesis. Make no use of images as in the former case, but proceeding only in and through the ideas themselves. I do not quite understand your meaning, he said. Then I will try again. You will understand me better when I have made some preliminary remarks. You are aware that students of geometry, arithmetic, and the kindred sciences assume the odd and the even and the figures and three kinds of angles and the which and the like in the several branches of science. These are their hypotheses, which they and everybody are supposed to know, and therefore they do not deign to give any account of them, either to themselves or others, but they begin with them and go until they arrive at last, and in a consistent manner, at their conclusion. Yes, he said, I know. But and do you know, and do you not know also that although they make use of the visible forms and reason about them, they are thinking not of this, but of the ideas which they resemble, not of the figures which they draw, but of the absolute square and the absolute diameter and so on, the forms which they draw or make, and which has shadows and reflections in water of their own, are converted by them into images, but they are really seeking to behold the things themselves which can only be seen with the eye of the mind. That is true. And of this kind I spoke as the intelligible, although in the search after it the soul is compelled to use hypothesis, not ascending to a first principle, because she is unable to rise above the region and hypothesis, and, but employing the objects of which the shadows below are resemblances in their turn as images, they having in relation to the shadows and reflections of them a greater distinctness and therefore a higher value. I understand, he said, that you are speaking of the province of geometry and the sister arts, and when I speak of the other division of the intelligible, you will understand me to speak of that other sort of knowledge which reason herself attains by the power of dialectic, using the hypothesis not as first principles, but only as hypothesis, that is to say, as steps and points of departure into a world which is above hypothesis, in order that she may soar beyond them to the first principle of the whole, and clinging to this, and then to that which depends on this. By successive steps she descends again without the aid of any sensible object from ideas through ideas, and in ideas she ends. I understand you, he replied, not perfectly, for you seem to me to be describing a task which is really tremendous, but at any rate I understand you to say that knowledge and being, which the science of dialectic contemplates, are clearer than the notions of the arts, and they are them which proceed from hypothesis only. These are also contemplated by the understanding and not by the senses, yet because they start from hypothesis and do not ascend to a principle, those who contemplate them appear to you not to exercise the higher reason upon them, although when a first principle is added to them, they are cognoscible by the higher reason, and a habit which is concerned with geometry and the coordinate sciences. I suppose that you would term understanding and not reason as being intermediate between opinion and reason. You have quite conceived my meaning, I said, and now, corresponding to these four divisions, let there be four faculties in the soul: reason, answering to the highest, understanding to the second, faith or conviction to the third, and perception of shadows to the last. And let there be a scale of them, and let us suppose that the several faculties have clearness in the same degree that the objects have truth. I understand, he replied, and give my assent and accept your arrangement.